Hello, crafty friends! It's Alicia here with the project for Tailored Expressions. In today's video, I'm going to be creating a slightly spooky card with a fun little surprise. To create a scene, I'll be using the new Stayin Alive stamp and coordinating die set. And for a fun interactive element, I'll be using the new Another Door Opens die set. For some layering and backgrounds, I got out the A2 Layer Stacklets, the new Squiggle Stacklets, and the Up Against a Wall stamp. This has a great split feature so you can easily stamp in different colors. For cardstocks today, I'll be using Oreo, poppy seed, sugar cube, and candy corn. And at first I got out the poppy seed and candy corn inks, but as I got into the process I wanted to add a little bit of texture to my haunted house, so I got out the Shiplap Background stamp and the oyster ink pad. To help with stamping, I'll be using the TE exclusive Teal Misty, their Just Press tool, and I'm going to be doing some heat embossing, so I got out Versamark ink, Detail White embossing powder, and the anti-static powder tool. And I'll be using a variety of adhesives to hold everything together. Let's get crafty! I'm going to get started today by doing the stamping, and the first thing will be stamping 3 of the skeletons from the Stayin Alive stamp set and the Open If You Dare sentiment onto a scrap of Oreo cardstock. Once I had my cardstock in place and my stamps picked up with the Door of the Misty, I did prep the cardstock with the anti-static powder tool so the embossing powder only sticks to where I want it. Now because we will be die cutting today, it wouldn't be a big deal if there was some stray powder, but I just like to be in the habit. To make sure the sentiment and images were nice and juicy for that embossing powder, I did ink them up and stamp twice, making sure to use the Just Press tool to get a nice crisp impression. After that was done, I brought in the white detail embossing powder and poured it over my cardstock, making sure to add extra powder where needed, and I tapped the excess off over the anti-static funnel tray to make it easier to put that extra back in the jar. I ran my heat tool for about 30 seconds off camera before bringing it to the cardstock and melting the powder. I just love how the shine on that white powder makes the bones look a little bit more real on those skeletons. Next, I'll be stamping the Up Against the Wall background stamp onto a scrap of sugar cube cardstock with candy corn and poppy seed inks. The setup for this stamp is a little bit different. I'm going to put the pieces on the Door of my Misty and then put my sugar cube cardstock face down on top of it. I did try to make sure it was straight across and centered, and I added a little bit of adhesive to the back so that when I pick up the opposite side of the Misty and press it down, then my piece of cardstock is in place where I need it to be. Now because this is a split stamp, I'm going to remove the bottom portion and ink up the top with candy corn ink. Again, to get a good impression, I'm using the Just Press tool. Now if you wanted to get a darker orange or maybe something was missing, you could definitely ink it up and stamp it again. But for me, I'm going to go ahead and put the bottom part of the stamp back down onto the door, making sure to line it up with the top, and then carefully remove the wallpaper section. Then I'm going to ink it up with that poppy seed ink and get it stamped. And this time I was missing just a little bit, so all I had to do was re-stamp it and use that Just Press tool with a little added pressure where the stamp was missing. And for the final bit of stamping, I'll once again be using sugar cube cardstock, but this time I'm going to stamp the Shiplap background onto it with oyster ink. Just like with the previous stamp, I'm actually going to start by putting the stamp on the door and picking up my cardstock with the opposite side. I just love to use background stamps to add texture like this, and this will make it look more like the outside of a house on my card front. Let me know below what your favorite background stamp is and how you like to use it. Now it's time to do some die cutting. First, I brought in my wallpaper piece, and I'll be using the fourth from largest rectangle stacklet to cut that down. And then I found the coordinating dies for each of my skeletons and the sentiments. I took these off screen to do the die cutting, and here's a look at those cute little pieces. I love the border that it leaves around the sentiment and skeletons. Next, I'm going to use that same rectangle stacklet on the shiplap piece, and I'm also going to be die cutting the doors from the Another Door Opens die set, as well as using the big open window for each of the doors. For the candy corn piece of cardstock, I'll be using the largest Squiggle Stacklet. Here's a look at all of those die cut. I love how the doors open, such a fun interactive element. And on the candy corn piece, I love that kind of wavy border. It kind of adds to the eerie feeling of the card. There's just a little bit more die cutting to do. I'm going to be using the door dies. I'm going to cut the left two from poppy seed cardstock and the right one from a scrap of candy corn. Now this time for the windows, I am going to use the one that has the 4 panes. Once those were die cut, I brought in some scissors and I cut each of the doors out, trying to be super careful and keep my blade right where the score line was made with the die. That leaves me with 3 fun doors to add a little bit more color to my card front. To add these to the shiplap piece, I'm going to be using Barely Art liquid glue. That way when I go to put the doors on top of each other, I have some wiggle time before it dries to make sure everything is nice and lined up. Now the reason before why I cut the full window out of the back door was just in case the cross or the panes didn't come together perfectly for this part of the card. I am adding the gray doors to the left two, and then to make the right one look different, because that's the one that's going to open, I added the candy corn door. I did make sure that that would open nice and fully before pressing down the door and letting it dry. I brought back in my wallpaper piece, and now I'm going to add the doors to it. Off camera, I did put some foam sticky strips on the back, making sure that the doors would still open. And once I pulled the release paper on that, I brought back in the liquid glue and I put some across all of that foam. This way there's kind of a little buffer of the liquid glue for some wiggle time and adjustment before it adheres to the back panel. Now I did my best to adjust it nicely, but it did get stuck a little sooner than I'd hoped, so some of the backer was showing. So all I did was bring back in my scissors and just carefully cut away some of the wallpaper piece. All of the pieces are ready, so it's time to assemble the card. I'm using a poppy seed card base, and the first thing I'm going to do is add my candy corn squiggly piece to the front center. Then the door piece gets layered center right on top of that. Now we can add a little spookiness and interactivity to the card. So for this I brought back in my 3 skeletons, and on the one that goes behind the orange door I did add some foam tape to the back. Just like with the door piece, I am going to add some liquid glue to this before I put it in place. That way I can kind of adjust it and make sure the face looks through the window like I want it to before I press it in place. For the other 2 skeletons, I'm using liquid glue to just put those flat down onto the wallpaper piece behind the doors. Again, because I'm using liquid glue, I have some time to wiggle it around and get them placed exactly where I want them. I don't want the doors to collapse in on themselves if the card gets compressed, so I brought in a couple scraps of sticky strips and put one behind each door. For this sentiment, I want to put these across the 2 poppy seed doors just so the recipient doesn't try to open them. So I added some glue to the back and got it placed across those. Now finally, for my candy corn door, I want to make it look more like you can open it. So I brought in the Oreo enamel dots and I added one of the smallest size right where there's a hole in the die where the door handle would be. To finish the card, I stamped Happy Halloween onto a piece of sugar cube cardstock and added it to the inside. And here are some close-up looks at the finished card. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch today's video. If you enjoyed the process, a thumbs up is appreciated. And if you're not already a subscriber, we do hope you'll click on the button below so you're the first to know about our latest videos. To find out more about the products I used today, you can check out the links in the description box or visit the Tailored Expressions online store at tailoredexpressions.com.